Paths are never a straight line, but if you embrace the windy road, you'll eventually find your way. Join us. Another episode of the Get Overit Podcast. I am your host, Dr. Christopher Fasano. Thank you for joining us for another episode. Before we begin, just a reminder, the quickest way to get new episodes of the Get Overit Podcast is to subscribe to your favorite pod player, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. That way, the new episodes will push automatically to your phone. You won't have to go out looking for them. We also do video recordings of this show, so you can find that on YouTube. Give us a subscribe if you prefer to watch in video format. But again, please leave us a review, make sure you subscribe, and thank you for joining us. So today's guest on the Get Overit Podcast is Dan O'Leary. Dan O'Leary is a senior SEO specialist here at Overit. And these shows, for me, when I get to talk to people that I work with at Overit, are really fun because I don't really know a lot of my colleagues very on a personal level, right? You work with them together, you know things about them, but it's good to find out about their journey, where they came from. So we're going to do that today with Dan O'Leary. Dan, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having us, Chris.
So, all right, this is fun, like I just said, because, I know you now for like 2 to 3 years, but I only know you to what I know you of.
Professionally.
And so, and I know some things. I know you have kids. I know you're married. I know these things. But this is a good opportunity to get to not just know you more personally, but you have a journey, and your journey is very similar to mine in that where we both started, like in terms of professional career journey, possibly in life, but in professional journey, where you started wasn't where you are now, and it's fairly different. I mean, there's common threads we'll find, but I think it speaks to this general concept in life is that there are no straight line paths.
Hardly ever.
To where you're going. And so you have that sort of circuitous path. So we're going to talk about that today on the show. So first off, man, like you're from up in this area your whole life?
No. So this is one thing I think we definitely have in common. I am not a Capital Region native. So for those who are listening, we're based out of Albany, New York. Capital Region is like Albany, Schenectady, Troy, the kind of 3 cities. I was born in the Bronx in New York City.
You're a downstate guy.
So I'm a downstate guy. My family is both on my mother and father's side, they're Bronx natives. I'm a second generation Irish American. Like my parents were like the first kids born in America. Their family's from Ireland. So, so I'm from the Bronx originally. So
you before we go any further, you agree that the bagels downstate are better than the ones
absolutely.
Okay, all right. Just for the record. Just putting it on the record. Okay. Go.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely a bagel snob. Pizza too.
Same.
A lot of the New York City classic food staples. Yeah, they're okay.
I'm saying that because someone that we work with, another colleague here, I won't say her name, Lisa Barone, said that there is no difference between bagels downstate and upstate, and that's just something, it's like a nostalgic thing in our minds, but I firmly disagree and would put that to the test any day.
I had a decent bagel 2 weeks ago. Like it's not nostalgia. It's empirically better.
Yeah, all right, good. All right, now we got that established. So when did you leave the city?
1990. So like I was 10 years old basically.
Okay.
So like right before middle school, I was in elementary school. My parents moved to Orange County, New York, which is like still south of here, but coming from New York City, that was upstate.
That's considered
anything
upstate.
north of like the Tappan Zee, Cuomo Bridge is
upstate.
It's considered upstate, right? But now I'm up here.
Did they go for work, or they were just trying to get out of the city, or
both?
Okay.
But actually, no, not for work at all. My father actually continued to work in downtown Manhattan for like the next 20 years. He took a bus down there every day.
Wow.
Took public transportation. Yeah, my father never had a driver's license because he was a city guy.
Yeah.
So many people in New York City don't even own a vehicle.
Never
never mind.
Want to. It's like very proud.
Exactly. So he would take a bus into town. My mother would drive him to the bus stop. He'd go in the morning. He'd just reverse the route and get back every night. And he did that for 20 years. But
where in Orange County, by the way? What was the town?
It's a little. I lived in a town outside of Montgomery.
Okay.
Right. Montgomery is between Newburgh and Middletown.
Okay.
If you're going up the thruway, like it's exit 17.
But you did some New York. New York City public school, elementary school then?
Yeah. I went to PS 95 in the
Bronx.
Then
you did middle school
in Orange County and high school.
All right.
So I lived there, and my family's still down there. My sister still lives in Orange County. My father still lives in Orange County.
Okay.
But I came up here because of college. So I went to SUNY Albany my freshman year.
Okay.
And then I transferred to Union College, which is where I met my wife, where I graduated from.
And you graduated when?
2002 was my bachelor's,
Same.
and then I stayed
See
for
that?
my master's, and I got that in 2003.
Okay. All right. So
and I've been here ever since. Like,
so you went to SUNY and then you transferred to Union. And why that? You just thought it had a better opportunity?
So I was applying. I applied to both Union and SUNY Albany coming out of high school, and I was accepted. I was given scholarships, kind of financially, to like both. But with SUNY Albany, my tuition would have been entirely paid for, and the only thing I would have had to cover was like room and board. So my parents at the time, we didn't have a ton of money. I won't say like we were poor. Like obviously we're able to like move out of New York City.
Getting that kind of help helps.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So for like a year, it was like, well, maybe you go to SUNY, and also like Union's like a very small college. Like SUNY's like a university.
It's more of that liberal arts college feel.
Yeah. So I went to SUNY Albany for a year, and I liked it. But one, the architecture of the campus. Like, I don't know if the audience have ever seen it. It's a campus that was, as I understand it, originally designed, the architect, for like the Arizona desert, like where there is no wind, right? But we're up here in Northeast New York, Northeast, like upstate
where
New
there's
York,
wind.
And like and the winters on that campus were brutal. I did one of them, very windy to get from like where you were, and just didn't really like it. And meanwhile, if you've ever seen like Union College, while it's in the middle of Schenectady, which is like a very urban city, like the campus itself, it's one of the most well manicured.
It's very nice.
It has like a horticultural garden. Yeah, it's a very good school.
Awesome sports too. They have like hockey.
The hockey program is very, very well known there.
Yeah.
It's only D1 program. All the other athletics are D3, but they've won the basically the national hockey championship.
Yeah, what's that called?
The Frozen Four.
Frozen Four.
Yeah, so they've won the Frozen Four in years past. So.
So that was similar to actually the similar experience. So I started at Siena College, and I went to Siena, and I turned down a lot of other schools because of the money. Because my thought, I wanted to go to medical school, and my thought was like, that's going to cost me a whole bunch of money, and most likely I'm not getting a scholarship to medical school. So let me save on the upfront, because to me, I was like, college doesn't really matter. I viewed it as like just a checkbox, which was actually very mature of me back as an 18-year-old. But now that I think about it, that turned out to be not true, because I hated it so much. I went to Miami for the fun. So I thought I wanted it as a checkbox. Turns out I really wanted a bigger school. But I went initially for the scholarship. Luckily, a lot of them transferred to Miami. But so what did you go into college for, thinking like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I like?
So in high school, I was thinking like science or engineering. Like I really enjoyed physics. I really enjoyed as a teenager, even as a child, really like astronomy and things like that. So I didn't really kind of know, but I thought it may be like physics, astronomy,
so you were like a STEM guy.
Yeah, exactly. I was president of the Science Honor Society in high school. But then like my junior year of high school, I had a really fantastic English teacher. Like, she was amazing. And I took the SATs, and I ended up getting like, a fairly high score on the SATs, including on like the verbal section. And she kind of was like, you're as equally talented as a reader and a writer, frankly, as you are. Like, I know you like the math and science, but like you could do that if you wanted.
Do that too, right?
So like I kind of really fell into this like very like I want to say like romanticized notion of like college, and it became all of a sudden like Dead Poet Society for me. Like I want to study literature,
pensive and like
and like write poems and so I eventually became an English and philosophy double major. By the time I was a senior, the double major was just a little too hard. I didn't enjoy this one philosophy seminar, so like literally like 5 or 10 credits short of the actual true double degree, I dropped philosophy entirely. It was a minor. I had enough credits by that point for it to be like my minor.
Was the major double major a requirement, or you just took it?
No, I just was really interested.
Sometimes schools with philosophy and or certain majors require a double major.
It really was kind of like, again, I couldn't really like pick which I liked either or. Like when I was reading English literature, obviously it's like mostly like it's fiction. It's not true, right?
Yep.
It's not. It obviously explores the world,
correct,
but it doesn't explore it the way that like a philosophy person would do it. So I kind of liked the straight hardcore like philosophy classes, Plato, Socrates, logic, epistemology, metaphysics. But then sometimes in literature, it's just like we're exploring these same topics, but it's like through the lens of like a fictional like character, right? So but eventually when you get really into it, like hardcore philosophy,
it gets
very difficult courses.
And see, philosophy for me, people, when you think about a philosophy major or going to school for philosophy, you get that immediate like knee-jerk reaction, like, and I remember taking a lot of philosophy. I remember trying to talk to my parents about philosophy, and their knee-jerk reaction from working people is, what are you going to do with philosophy?
Yeah.
What I've learned about that, getting a doctorate in philosophy, because PhDs are that. I don't know if people, you're in a subject area, but the degree, a PhD is really a degree in thought, and it's learning how to philosophize about a subject. That could be anything.
Yeah.
Mine just happens to be in a neuroscience or biomedical science. But what I learn and appreciate about philosophy is that it really teaches you how to think.
Absolutely.
And like that, so when out of the PhD now, people are like, oh, so you're not doing neuroscience now, so what'd you go to school for? And I say to them, I'm like, those years of in that taught me how to think about things in a way that I would have never been able to. Maybe I should strong, but I think about things in a much different way, being trained in that regard. Because when you get into philosophy, you can't take it for face value. You really have to think about it. You have to reread it, possibly multiple times. You're thinking it through. You're referencing old stuff. You got to go into other people's stuff and see how they drew their lines of logic. So it's research, right? And it's more than just philosophy now that I think back on it. So I could see how someone in that, though, could use that later in life. Like even in the situation where you are now in numbers,
every day,
you have a thought process that's different than a lot of other people here. And I'm wondering if you think you got that from that experience.
Yeah, no, and even when I took philosophy, again, because I really liked math and science, like there are philosophy classes where it's like very analytical, like not just like, pie in the sky, like what's the meaning of life?
Right.
Like
this is a chair. Is it really a chair?
Yeah, is it really a chair? And but like when you take like logic, like you learn like, Boolean logic, and then eventually it becomes like basically like first order logic as like Kurt Gödel, the mathematician, kind of like laid it out, and you can kind of understand like how syllogisms work, how philosophical proofs, like, premise to conclusion, airtight. We were talking about like, what are you going to do with a philosophy degree? Like most people who, if you don't teach philosophy, the number one profession philosophers go into is like law school. They become lawyers.
Correct.
They become politicians. They become legislators.
Very logical thought.
Exactly. And it's really the ability to like really dive deep into like nuance, right? To really delineate like this shade of gray and to find out, well, gray is made up of black and whites though. So like, where are those like kind of things, right? And being tolerant with that kind of like
being tolerant with it is the most important thing. And I think that like
of ambiguity.
A bigger problem in our world today is that the thought process, the ability to philosophize and think about things, there's a lot of people that don't really want to engage in that. I find like I'm the one that would sit with anyone for hours and just go deep into something and talk about its nuance and where, and a lot of people don't want to do that nowadays. They like to take things for face value. And I feel like, I don't know, I know you have kids. I watch how my kid has to navigate this world today. And there is just not a lot of opportunity for kids to be pensive and to think and to question. And I concerns me as a human, as a father, just as somebody who appreciates and understands what you can get out of something if you really think through it rather than superficial glance. And I feel like our brains are being told, I feel like don't go too deep anymore.
Similar age, like we just had more downtime as children. Like I grew up with a computer. Like my father was a computer programmer. I was one of, the first kid in my class that I knew that even had like a PC at home. But like connecting to the internet in like 1986, 88, 1990.
You got kicked off when somebody called.
Yeah. Or if you're even allowed on, because the cost to dial in from from a modem, it was like a modem back then, right? Was just prohibitive. So like
you weren't void of technology. It was just that we didn't have the ability to reach into our pocket and be completely occupied. Like I remember my mom being like, I remember now, like, go do something constructive. Go figure something out. I remember her saying that to me all the time, and I remember hated hearing outside. I remember hated hearing that, and she'd be like, "Yeah, get out of the house, come back for dinner." And I would go, and we didn't have anything on us, but we knew what time. We were like cats. We rolled in. We always showed up, right? And that's just. But it was a different lifestyle, and I hope that philosophy maintains and persists these subject areas, And I'm going to try to push my kid to get into that a little bit because I feel like it does have benefit down the line. So I just want to make sure we go through all the way through with the time limit.
So that's my academic background.
So now you're done with college.
Yeah.
You go to grad school for?
I went to grad school for teaching.
Okay, so education.
Education, yeah.
Okay.
Because again, it's
And
like, what are you going to do with an English
that?
degree? English.
So, and was it like secondary ed or?
Secondary education, yeah.
Okay.
So Union has a master's program that offers like actually one of the few like full year internships at a local high school. So even to this day, like most people who do like student teaching, they're studying to be teachers, they may go for 6, 12, maybe even up to 18 weeks as their traditional like actual like in school teaching experience before they send them out to the wild, which I find to be like crazy because I spent a full year doing it and I wasn't prepared to like to really do it. Yeah. And in fact, like after I finished up my master's program, even though I had the full year internship, I was having difficulty like actually finding like a teaching job. So I needed to pay the bills. So like I quickly just like got a job. And then, eventually I was kind of like, I don't.
And that job was what?
I worked in retail. So I eventually went into retail. Coming right out of college, I went into retail.
Out of your master's?
Yeah, with a master's. So like I'm working at the mall in like a store. I eventually got promoted to like management, a key holder. Mm-hmm. You're kind of managing some people. And I did that for a few years because I knew that like fundamentally the year that I spent teaching at a school kind of, I won't say it like left a bad taste in my mouth, but it's very eye-opening. Again, I mentioned like, I thought it was going to be like Dead Poet Society.
Yeah, it wasn't
right?
that.
No, it's not. And the turnover rate in teaching is very, very high.
Yeah.
Other than like police officer or like maybe air traffic controller, like some really like high stress jobs, very few careers have like, it's like well over 50% will drop out and not do it anymore within their first 5 years. Well, I made that decision within like year one.
Yeah.
I still love English and I still love teaching. I love to teach and train and coach people. But what I found was like 30 14-year-olds in an urban environment is like not necessarily like my cup of tea.
That don't work
it's
for
certainly
me.
a lot of more administrative and bureaucratic and kind of paperwork
oriented.
It's
not being able to just freewheel teach in there.
It's not. Nor do you want that. I mean, again, it's a very romanticized notion of what teaching is.
Yeah. At that level, right.
And those who can really do it, I have the utmost respect for them. Those who like put in the years, because I find, again, it takes like 5 to 10 years to even really get good at like teaching. Mm-hmm. So the realities are like, if you have kids in schools, like some of their teachers are like going to be fundamentally better at their craft than others.
Correct.
Some of them I think have native born talent to teach, but I don't think like, you have to acquire it on the job and experience and really be dedicated to your craft. Because there's a lot of pitfalls in that profession. And that was one of the first eye-opening things for me is like, I'm no longer a child, I'm becoming like a man, an adult. And it's realizing like, you can like the subject matter of a job, but if you don't like the actual day-to-day realities of the job, you're going to be disappointed, and you're not.
It's all encompassing,
absolutely.
and it'll affect.
And they don't really tell you that when you're studying that in college.
It gets in your head, it affects your mind, and then what happens then. Everything else suffers from that.
Yeah.
I think I'm married to an elementary school teacher,
God
so
bless her.
I hear all about it, and I taught for the first almost. In my career, like for 5-6 years,
like a TA.
But I was an assistant professor, and I was teaching. I was teaching graduate students in college. I picked up some college classes just to teach because I found it to be a more fun crowd.
That's
college
where I picked teaching back up. So later on,
like I taught and I had an adjunct at Siena. I was teaching there for a little bit, but I just didn't have the time anymore. Mm-hmm. But what I found was like I don't have patience for kids, like young kids. I don't have that. That's not my game. Where I really excel is I know like grad students. I know that they want to be here. They're here because they've chosen. They could have been done. But they decided to continue their education. They're adults. They're in a different place in their life. And I can teach how I want. And you're either going to pay attention or you're not. But I don't have to care. Because my job is less to get you through requirements and standardizations at that point in time.
Yeah.
You want to get a degree. It's on you to put the effort in. And like I am going to be a little more, I can be tough. I can speak to them like adults. I do much better in that regard. I taught college labs, which was really fun. Because that gave me... Yeah, and it gave me the opportunity to make science fun because science is fun. And like in college, you can get real bitter with science, because a lot of kids and people go in, they think it's like, I'm going to work with body and it's going to be human, but a lot of it's like that hardcore biological stuff. Why are we learning about this? But like, it's very fun.
Organic chemistry.
Correct. Who cares? But like the labs can be really fun. So I love to get kids excited about it. Like that was really fun for me. So I do love teaching, but there's a type of kid or person that I do better at. So then you're in retail, and then where do you go from there?
Retail, I get back into education, right? But now I'm teaching adult learners for the most part. So then I got an opportunity to teach at a local college, and it was like a 2-year to 4-year degree program. It was a technical school, ITT Tech. They no longer exist. They were kind of caught. Tech, yep. They were caught up in a lot of the for-profit kind of predatory loan things. But the programs themselves were, depending on which location you were, fundamentally sound. So I started teaching writing, reading, right, and general education classes at that. And that's what I found. Some of the students were like, they were traditional college age, but maybe like a traditional college was not for them, right, for either academics or personality reasons. So I did teach them 18 to 20-year-olds, but I taught just as many people who are like, well, I'm 40 to 50. My old job was like a truck driver, but now I want to learn like information technology. I want to work with network systems or what have you, right? So I've kind of renewed my passion again. It's like, well, it was the realities of like teaching in like public schools at a certain age group, but really, again, your passion and enthusiasm for a subject shines through. So I started teaching again, and I learned just as much from that job as I did for the first time that I kind of went through it, because working with adult learners, they're far more self-motivated in my experience, because they're not just going because they're being told like, oh, it's something to check off a checkbox. Right. When you make a decision fundamentally like, oh, I'm an adult, I have my own bills and responsibilities, and in many cases they had their own kids. Some of their kids were college age, and they're going back, and I'm like, again, like hat tip to you, because like that's a decision, like if I were in your scenario, I don't know if I could do that. Same. Like how many like rolls of the dice do you get like in life? I feel like I've already made quite a few of those, So I got back into teaching, and then weirdly enough, one of my students was working for a digital marketing company based out of like Clifton Park, New York. And I was teaching him writing skills. And he was like, the company that I work for, they're always in need of copywriters. Since, you're teaching me to write,
so
how to write.
That was the bridge.
So that was the bridge. So the thing with ITT and really a lot of colleges these days, for-profit, private, public, they're all driven by adjuncts. Right.
Yes.
So adjunct scheduling,
another
it's like
subject for another day. I feel like
the pay is lower.
It's like indentured servants.
It's often it feels like you're indentured servitude, and fundamentally for me, it's like I was kind of used to like the lower base of pay, which it like made sense to me. But like the unreliability of like term to term, what your course load was going to be like, what classes you were going to be teaching, and even fundamentally like what days of the week, how many classes. I wanted I didn't have at that time. I didn't have like a family yet, but I had a wife, right? So it's like we want to start a family. Well, it's no way to like have a family if like every 12 to 15 weeks I have to like upend my life or schedule and get my wife to like adjust to it. So it's like I was looking for something like a little bit more like stable in terms of that. So I was like, well, let me try it.
Like the adjunct faculty is sort of like they're dating you. And they don't want to commit to you.
They don't.
But like they really like you a lot, like because you're good for them and you're good for their
particularly the lower level courses.
Correct.
It's very cost effective.
Very cost effective. Yeah. So they really like you, but they're not willing to commit to you, and that they're not really willing. That's the basis of it. Yeah. And so you're sort of stuck because you like it, or you might think it'll turn into something that then they will commit to you. Like if I get in here, maybe I can get a position, because academic positions
or tenure.
You have to remember, in academics, there are tenured faculty that never leave.
Yeah.
So like the openings there, unless they're adding new salary lines, is very competitive. They rarely do.
Yeah.
So then that's your bridge. So do you jump full time, or do you start doing some work there?
I jumped full time to doing the copywriting. So now I'm working at this internet marketing company. It's 40 hours. It's got benefits. Pay is actually pretty decent to start. I was very happy moving to there. But I kept actually teaching classes for at least like another year or two.
All right.
But I cut down on the number of classes. I said like I'll do one a week or something like that, because I still really enjoy teaching. But then eventually, not long after I got into internet marketing, by now I'm like over 30. So I'm on my third career now by like 30 years old, right? But my wife and I are purchasing a house. We have we have our first child, right? right? So I just was like, it's too much. So I'm not even though the little bit extra money is nice, the amount of like time and commitment it took fundamentally wasn't worth it.
Right.
So I at that point was like, all right, well, I guess now I'm all in on digital marketing. And that actually ended up, and I'm still doing it to this day.
So then we were in copy and writing. When did you start to transition to what you do now, which is, SEO optimization, which we had Joe on the show. We were talking about it. A lot of SEO is writing, or it's at its fundamental core with it is content, right? And getting that. So it's not so far disproportionate, like separate.
No.
So
being a copywriter is a very natural jump to being an SEO.
Did they
specialist.
enlist? Did they ask you? Did they say, "Hey, we need you to write this with SEO in mind"?
Yes.
Is that how it started?
Yes.
Okay.
So the company I worked for, they offered some other services, but their fundamental business model was offering search engine optimization services. So SEO, for those in the audience who don't know, it stands for search engine optimization. And basically, if you are a business and organization, you want to show up on Google, ideally like page 1 of Google, right? So Google search results are very competitive, and SEO is basically just kind of like the art and the science, I think is how Joe Hall described it, of like how do you get on like page 1, right? So I was first hired to write copy for an SEO company, but then through a variety of things like departments and roles and responsibilities kind of like changed there, and they had an opening to a new department that was like growing, and they called it like reporting and analytics. So basically it was like, we need you to like look at client websites, kind of like audit them. I learned how to like audit websites and business models and find opportunities to like improve their rankings in like search engine. So that probably happened within my first year. I think I probably spent 9 to 12 months as just like a copywriter or in that department, but then they moved me over to this other one, and they're like, you're going to learn and train kind of in this other department. I rapidly progressed very quickly in terms of like understanding the thing. I eventually grew to basically start mentoring kind of people in my own department underneath me, right? So as the department was growing, they're kind of like, well, Dan, you're a little bit older than like your colleagues. Right. You're over 30. Some of these people are still just coming out of college. You're in their 20s. So you're not like kind of like a natural mentor, and you do have like this teaching background. So we want you to kind of bring that to the table. So I kind of even developed not like real curriculum per se, but like natural paths of development where we could like scale training new hires or new people in the department, right? But also kind of like standardize it. And that's where like the nuts and bolts of like getting a degree in education, because they teach you fundamentally how to lesson plan. They're like, what your love of the subject matter is kind of like even the secondary most important thing to becoming a teacher, which is actually like working with your students, but kind of like also like fundamentally unit and like lesson planning, which is like, again, it's like, it's not a thrill for most teachers to have to do that, but it's like an utmost necessity. And those who like put like their passion of the subject before the lesson planning, I feel are like the ones who made like myself, like you're in for a rude awakening, or you're only going to get so far in your enjoyment of that career. Right. If you can't really, again, tolerate or accept that the realities of the job require planning, more than like doing.
What I found really interesting is that digital marketing is very scientific. And that's one of the reasons why I really love it so much. And it was a natural progression for me. And it's, the basis of digital marketing is you're doing things and you're getting a return of data. And then you're looking at that data, you're analyzing it, then you're drawing conclusion from it. And those conclusions drive hypotheses.
Yes.
You make a hypothesis, you design an experiment, you test the hypothesis, it works or it doesn't, and you have to continue to iterate. It's the same thing, and science is never static. Just because your hypothesis is correct or you improve your null hypothesis not correct doesn't mean that you're now done. It just means you're one step closer in a puzzle of infinite pieces, and you have to keep designing experiments. Digital marketing is just like that. And I think so people will say...
And like science, I feel like, when you watch movies of science, it's always like the positive discovery, the positive breakthrough. Most of actual science is like the negative discoveries. This isn't the case,
correct.
Right?
Because you can never prove something true, but you can prove it wasn't true.
Falsifiable, right? Which is something we kind of learned in like philosophy.
Correct.
Karl Popper, the falsification principle, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of like, and digital marketing, I feel, is kind of like that. It's a laboratory. We get like literally millions of data points like so every single week and month.
Data is not our problem. Generating data is not the problem, but analyzing it and making sense of it is where the money is made. And like that's really, really important. And that's why it takes a certain thought process. And in that, so like all the pieces come together, right? It's the writing, It's the thought of the philosophy, the English. It's the love of science.
Yep.
And when you look at like, for example, bring it full circle, your journey, and you say, well, it wasn't straight line. It wasn't. But I can draw a straight line through those curves.
It's a circuitous path.
It's weird, but there is a common thread always.
And I think when I finally kind of realized that, like I'm probably now like 3 to 5 years into my digital marketing career, like so I'm in year 11, 12 now. But I think like kind of, I got a few years into it and I was like, I think this is really going to stick. And it was because of that, where it's like nowadays, we interview even kids coming out of college where it's like they offer digital marketing tracks. Yep. It's not just marketing, it's like digital, and maybe even students come out and they kind of even have an understanding of like SEO. But even when I started, it's like there was no degree. Like maybe you could get a certificate from it, but it would be from like a third party private company. Like it would be basically like their kind of like certification, right? People get Google AdWords or they might get Google Analytics certifications, but there was no fundamental like one standardized curriculum for it. So it's like, well, but there's no shortage of demand for needs of good advice in SEO, regardless of what your budget is. Like again, if you're a business organization that has a website, you need it to appear in Google results. So I'm finding that like there's no shortage of positions that now have like SEO like in the title, but it's like, where are you finding these people? And in my experience, it's like find them from wherever you can find them.
Wherever
they are. And you have to kind of meet them that way, because I think again, it requires a kind of like hybrid skill set. So it's like you kind of need someone who's like, again, maybe these days there are those who are like, I just learned that. But I find it's like, no, you kind of need to find people who maybe did different things. Like your previous guest, Joe Hall, like he went for school for political science.
Yeah, he did.
Right?
I know.
Almost every SEO that I know professionally like has a story like that they're like, I did this. Many of them ran their own businesses, had websites, had to teach themselves SEO, and then started offering that service. They stopped doing what they were even doing and went into like SEO and started selling that services to their own colleagues or former competitors, because they were like, I struggled with it so much, I knew that there was going to be a market opportunity for it, right? But again, it's kind of like there is no one career path, I would say these days for really anything in digital marketing, but particularly for like something like search engine optimization. Because it's like you need to definitely be able to read, write, report, make a presentation, right? I joke that like, what do you do? And it's like, I spend most of my time in like a document, a spreadsheet, or a slide deck, PowerPoint, right? I learned Microsoft Office. But like to really use all three of those things particularly well and equally well is, it's kind of like part and parcel of like the job description. And to wear those different hats and be able to jump from that, got to talk to a client today, so I got to brush my teeth and comb my hair. But other days I spend 8 hours on my couch just diving into spreadsheets, and it's like really wonky analytical work.
But again, I think that broader skill set has then helped with that in that regard. We have limited time, and I want to get to this subject because we talked about it before. You're a guy that's in your head a lot, like me. I'm in my head, and I think it's just some people are their brains are wired that way. I'm wired to think. I'm in my head, and being in your head and being in my head can lead to overthought and being anxious, which I am, and I know you suffer from it too. Yep. I have another show, a mental health show, that I do this because first of all, it helps me. It's sort of like my therapy. And I'm concerned for kids nowadays in this world. So, I talk about it there, but I'm curious to know, did you always have that bit of anxiety? Was it a socials anxiety? Tell me a little bit about what it is for you.
For me, so I was not diagnosed with anxiety, and I also have depression. It's more seasonal depression in nature, but it's kind of
happens here.
Yeah. In the Northeast, right? Yeah. But I wasn't diagnosed till I was over 40. So again, I'm like well into my career. I'm actually working at Overit, and I'm starting to like, it wasn't any one thing, but I really started to just kind of like
be down.
Yeah, I felt like erode was the word I used with my therapist when I talked to her. Like I like the ocean is like beating at a cliff, and like you look at like a cliff and it's like it's a rock, a rock, right? And it's like, but even cliffs erode, but like which one wave like did it? Anyway, it's just like I got to a point where it's like I need to talk to someone and I need to take a step back from work. So I actually went part-time here at Overit for like a little bit. Overit's been very.
It's actually when I just came
when we
on.
first met, you had just joined, and I was
right.
kind of like stepping back a little bit. So I ended up talking to a therapist, and she was like, you basically have generalized anxiety, classic anxiety disorder, and you also have depression to a slight degree, mostly exacerbated by like seasonal depression. So when I went, it was like fall, winter, right? Miserable, right?
Yep.
Now it's spring, and I'm like,
you're like,
there's some pep in my step these days, right? But the anxiety, and it's kind of like I got to a point where like, like you're at work, but you can't think about work. It's like so stressful, and you're thinking about. When I was at work, I was actually thinking about my personal life and home life, and how I was like basically failing there. And then when I was at home, instead of like connecting with my family, I was my head was at was at work, and it's just like, why aren't you working when you're at work and being a father and a husband when you're at home? And I got myself in a place where I got all twisted and combobulated, and I could not get out of it. Like I was not sleeping well, I wasn't eating well. My wife basically is like, you're not present. Like you're here, but you're not present, and that really like. It hurt to hear that, but it was like fundamentally like true. So it's like, you need to go talk to someone, you need to get like help. And then you start talking to people, and she's like, for me, my anxiety is like, it's very physical. And like when we kind of like realize the signs and symptoms of like when an anxiety attack is like creeping up on me, it's like largely tied to like a tightness in my chest.
I get that too.
A pit in my stomach, like a nausea. And like, kind of through talking about it, I realized like, oh, that nausea feeling, pit in my stomach, it goes back to like when I was a child. Like there were certain,
you can think back and be like, I remember that.
Yeah, that and these are types of things. If you are a parent, your kid's ever like, I got a tummy ache. Sometimes you're just like, you just shake it off. Like, yeah, kids get stomach aches, but if they kind of keep saying like, I think it's important to kind of like put like kind of like the patterns to it.
Yep.
Like what else?
Like a trigger
what else
or a
was going
thing.
on?
Right.
With, now my son again, because he demonstrates like a little bit of these. Now that I'm a little bit more familiar with like mental health, just at a high level, and the vocabulary and like ability to kind of like verbalize it, give it names, identify specific behaviors for what they are, rather than just like fundamentally like feelings, right? But I probably, since I was an adolescent, have suffered a little bit from like some signs of anxiety, but it gets
worse as you get older because you become more afraid. In my experience, like as you get older, you're not as like headstrong and like willing to risk, and as you get older and you have more responsibility,
there's more chips to lose.
There's more chips to lose, so you're more risk averse. And if you're in your head a lot, and I'm thinking, should I bet 10? Should I bet 20? That's the worst time to be in your head. It's a feel, it's a thing, and like so I get in my head, and it really one of the things that I have learned to do that has really helped me. I've worked with a therapist on this, and I teach my kid this too, is to externalize anxiety, meaning. What I do is I put a name to it, or I put an image to it. And I did this a lot during the pandemic, which got to me, like a really healthy person. But like I was like with my kid and my family and the structure and how everything worked. I worked on like I would give it a name, like a really bizarre name or an image. And whenever I felt it coming on, I would talk to it. I'd be like, I'm making this up now, but here's Bob. Bob's here. And Bob's trying to get me, but like screw Bob. Like, and what that does is, which is really, really smart, is it separate. A lot of times people that are anxious will say, I'm anxious, and I hope that it doesn't like limit me. And you make it, Chris is an anxious person, not Chris is somebody who experiences anxiety. Those are two different things.
Yeah.
And if you make it, that's who you are, it consumes you. So Bob externalized it from me. And now I can say like, sorry, Bob. Like, I can't deal with you today. And my brain can actually, that's processing that better, because I'm like, oh, and for kids, it's great because kids their imagery is better. They want to be more creative. If you're feeling like you're feeling afraid, I tell my kid, just, tell Bob to go away. It's fine. And like, it sounds crazy, but it's a very good behavioral tactic that I learned, and it has helped me get through some really tough times, because you can't be defined by that.
Yeah.
Otherwise you'll go deeper and deeper and deeper.
So I found, like talking about what was causing me stress was helpful. But what I found, like you said, give it a name. That's what I found to be the most like breakthrough moment for me in terms of like my mental health journey, right? That, and like my therapist, when she's talking to me, sometimes she would kind of go into the more like scientific, like, again, you come from like a neuroscience background, so you know all about it. It's like the way anxiety works. It's like, you have like the flight or fight response, your amygdala, all this kind of like emotional response. They're parts of your nervous system that aren't necessarily like the actually like most logical or
it's just reaction
conscious part. And then, hearing about how like serotonin works, like sometimes she'd be like, I'm sorry if I'm boring you. And I'm like, no, like
it helps. helps.
Like, because I'm such an like, again, I have a science background. It's like I did go to school for English, but I'm very scientific and data driven. So it's kind of like now when I'm having an attack, like I can like, instead, I don't give it a name like Bob, but what I say is just like, your blood pressure is raising now. You know, your pulse is quickening. Like I start to recognize the symptoms and just physically label them for what they are, right? And then I'm now separating, like there's a physical manifestation of it, right? But like you don't need to be terrified by it. You don't need to be confused or worried about like, is it natural? It's like now I so fundamentally understand what's happening.
Right.
Like if you like, if, you know, it's a different disease entirely, but like if you have diabetes, like you know what you're like when your blood sugar gets low, what it starts to feel like, right? So it's now, it becomes a little bit like that. It becomes much easier to manage for me because now with like when I have anxiety, I just look at it as like, you know, like it's the same way someone who's like blood sugar is falling. It's like you need to just take specific actions to kind of self-correct. And, you know, I no longer go to therapy. I don't actually take any medication. For a while I was taking some medication, but I kind of, there was it was wonderfully effective, but there was like cons to some of the medications I was taking. It actually made my brain like quite foggy sometimes I felt. And like with my job, I was like, I need to be like, I don't like how this feels.
That is the struggle of many a creative or many a smart, a genius, is that the smarter you are in your wiring, your brain is like a computer. It's got to be wired to do something really well. And if you're one of these super high functioning, incredibly smart humans, your brain is wired different. Yeah. But it tends to then not wire very well for other things. So you tend to possibly be less social. You tend to be less interactive, more normal. You're in your own world. And that can break them. And the only way to restabilize them is to take medication. But the stabilization kills the ability of them to create and be who they are. So most geniuses are wacky and don't want the drugs because they can't create, so they live a wacky life, and a lot of them to their demise. But like, they make that decision. You know, this isn't you, obviously. We're not extreme, but the brains can wire in that way. And
it took me months
to figure out a good balance.
What is the balance? Yeah. So for me, cognitive behavioral strategies I found to be the most effective. So that's towards the end of my tenure with the therapist, what we were like most working on, just like strategies and tactics where it's like, you need to like, it's very meta. You need to think about your thinking. Yeah. And again, as it's happening in real time, talk yourself back and understand like, this is perfectly natural. You don't need to feel ashamed or bad or sad about it, but it's just like, it's a reality of my like lived life now that it's just like, you know, when stress levels rise, like there's very predictable kind of patterns of both the behavior, but also like physiological feelings. So.
Well, I think, and we have a minute left here. I think you're doing what I think is the best thing to do, and that's you talk about it. Yeah. And talking about anything, in particular this, is incredibly helpful. It's the first step of it. If you can't talk about it or recognize it, it'll just take you over. I mean, you have to be able to step out. I always say you got to be able to step outside yourself and look at yourself and be like, ooh, you know, that's going to hurt you. We got to figure out a good way to get through it. So I guess that in the last minute, I would ask you, you know, you are where you are now. It wasn't necessarily where you thought you'd be, but that's okay. And you're a good example of like, you're good where you are now. Yes, you have your struggles and you whatever, but right, like what would you say to people who were like in this sort of journey and they're up and they're down and they're like winding? What would you say to them in those paths?
I think what I would tell them is like, be open to, the younger you are, the more open you should be to trying different things and have a tolerance for failure, or like taking 2 steps back for every like 1 step forward. And then I guess second is just like even failures or setbacks, if you treat them properly, are data points, right? You need to be able to learn just as much from like the things that you like weren't good at than like the things that you like really are good at. And there is still to this day, like as I do SEO, there are things that I will draw from like many different decades and aspects of my life and like bring to the table. And some of them, you know, looking back on it was like, well, where did you acquire that skill or that piece of knowledge? And it was like, well, that was a very difficult or painful chapter of my life. But like it's like compost. It's like you need to turn garbage into nutrients, right? Most of your life will be like the rubbish, the you know, I think even the happiest people, like what is true happiness? Like the most happy. Right. That's like 10% of your life tops. Right. Most of it is like boring, mundane stuff. And like 20% of it is like, frankly,
it's the
like
garbage that
painful.
Really makes you.
So do you want to just get nothing out of that, or do you want to get something out of it? So I'm a gardener. I know you garden. So the analogy I use, and I try to teach with my kids, like compost everything, because you know, even the worst painful things can sometimes
it's the garbage that
fuel
really makes
future
you
success.
like rich in your life and in a lot of things. Like, like despite what everybody sees on social media, life is not that way. There's a lot of down, there's a lot of hard, and that hard is ultimately what's going to pull you through and get you to be a better person. So, I want to thank Dan for this. This is great. This is great for me too, because again, like I get to talk to someone that I work with on a day-to-day basis, so we're typically only talk professionally. But I want to thank Dan for telling us his story, and I also want to thank you guys for listening. I also want to thank Dave and Adam in the Overit Studios. If you're checking this out and you're watching, and there's any way we can help you with your audio or video, if you want to do something like that, please reach out to us. You can go to overitstudios.com. Again, please subscribe, your favorite pod player. We'll be back with another episode. Dan, thank you so much, man. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris. Yep.